Are we ready?
We're going.
All right, here we go. All right. Red leather, yellow leather.
Peas and carrots. Peas and carrots.
Yes, there it is. There it is.
Yeah, boy!
Smile.
Okay, here we go. You ready? Silence!
All right. Welcome back to what is arguably season 3 of Exit 181. And it's only season 3 because we took a big break and we thought we'd do it entirely differently from now on. So, in the spirit of all things entirely differently from now on, we've got our first guest tonight, and we're not talking about music, and everything is just all over the place, crazy tonight. So, first, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Matt Duncan, and this is my co-host,
Dean Bianchi.
And with us this evening is our very good friend, former bandmate, former co-publisher, Andrew Fuller, who runs Legion Press and is the publisher of Three Lobed Burning Eye magazine online and in print annuals. And we decided that we would lean hard into our departure from our established platform kind of format, because Andrew is currently doing a Kickstarter. So we figured we'd give him a platform to pitch what's going on and hopefully urge some traffic toward that Kickstarter. Andrew, how about you tell us about who you are and what it is you do?
Thank you. I'm Andrew Fuller. I have an S in the middle of my name as an author and an editor. I've been writing speculative fiction for about 30 years now, and my first book finally came out last year, so it is a long road for some of us, and but have been publishing short fiction in various magazines and anthologies for the last 20 years or so, and I also edit as a side project that has its own life. I am editor of the magazine Three Lobed Burning Eye, which had a previous incarnation, which we'll probably talk about, as a small print zine at a university in Ohio, and in the early 90s. And then in the late 90s, as I was getting online, I thought it would be a good experiment to try to do a literary magazine online, because I had already done some publishing, and printing is expensive. Even now that there are a lot of ways that you can print things cheaper, it still costs money to print something of any size. Even if you're photocopying, and especially if you're trying to distribute and ship and all of that kind of thing, and especially if you're trying to get into bookstores and that kind of thing. So Three Lobed Burning Eye is began the second time as an experiment to do a magazine online, and actually behave like a professional magazine, in that people submit stories, you read a lot of slush, you select stories, you do edits with the writer, and you post. And it's been through a number of different seasons and frequencies over the last, I think the first issues were in 98 or 99. So it's been about 25 years. And this was the first. For several years, I'd been thinking about doing some crowdfunding for it, and just thought various things like, wow, that sounds like a lot of work that I would rather spend working on the magazine. But we did launch a Patreon last year, and get some support from that. And this is we have a Kickstarter going now that is close to the end, and it is the first kind of thing that we've done like that, where you ask for a big chunk of money. And I should stop ranting and let you ask me questions, but
you just answered like the first 4.
Okay.
So this is the danger of putting the list out first and letting you see what we're going to talk about. Now you that's fine though.
All right,
so
good. So let's wrap it up, and we're no.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Andrew, and I hope
Okay, there we
everybody
go.
visits your Kickstarter, and that's 3-lobed burning eye. Thank you, and good night. All right. So, the 3 of us were in a band together called Charlotte's Web. And Andrew, you have to remember that the title of this is Exit 181, because that,
Right.
college in Ohio is right off of that exit. So
Yeah.
you're allowed to mention Bowling Green, and nobody's going to come get you. Well, somebody might. Yeah. One of the copulating crabs may come after you. But so I think maybe
It's a long drive.
that is a long drive. So maybe we come back and talk about the band sometime again later, because I think we can tease that a little bit here, because we want to focus on your publication. And you covered a little bit of the BGSU times with the magazine. The thing that I remember most clearly is that your dad, who was a physics professor, gave you a laser printer in 1991. And I remember that very clearly, because number one, I'd never seen a laser printer before. and number two, the fact that your dad had an extra one. Like,
He upgraded.
Kind of a big deal. Yeah, that was bonkers.
My dad,
maybe
did I tell to give you an idea of what kind of character my dad was? He bought the second ever Pioneer brand Laserdisc player in the state of Nebraska in like 78 or 79, because there was one that I think the University in Omaha owned, and he was convinced that the format of big laser discs which were essentially precursors to CDs and DVDs and hard drives, really, that could store so much more information on them than any kind of floppy disks or anything that existed at that time. And he got that. He got a grant for the university to buy that, and the Pioneer Laserdisc player was the 70-pound thing that took like 3 minutes to spin up. And
wow.
And one of his first big multimedia projects was to do a physics lesson about the Tacoma Narrows bridge collapse in the 1920s, where they built this big bridge, and then within a month there was a windstorm and the whole bridge starts waving like this, and they have footage from just bystanders who are out there. It's all in black and white, and it's just little clips, but it's one of the scariest things. It looks like video manipulation, because the whole thing is just waving hugely, and there's a guy who jumps out of his car and is like running off of the bridge. It's pretty crazy. But he bought this because he wanted to teach a physics lesson about wavelengths, when the earliest VCRs came out, they didn't have 4-head VCRs. You couldn't freeze frame anything. So you could with a laser disc, you could do all the things that you could do with interactive media later, where you could have videos, you could pause things, you could still step, which you couldn't do for many years later. You could interact and have selections with a keyboard or remote to answer questions and take quizzes and stuff like that. And so he did a bunch of that stuff. So
that's
yeah,
crazy. So freeze frame is why he invested in a 70-pound laser. That's nuts. But this is the kind of stuff, like, I mean, here we are with our beards flecked with white. And why when we were boys, but it's crazy having conversations with people who just don't get that, like, nobody I knew had email until I was a senior in college. Like, like that kind of thing is just a wacky way. Like, to have the gear to do what we're doing right now when we were in college would have, required like satellites and shit, like it's just so
this.
So when you say 25 years, that it's been a while.
I mean, well, when you say, my huge tangent about technology, but when you talk about my dad getting his second laser printer, like I was one of the first kids in my dorm to have a Macintosh. Right. Yeah. Like, I don't think
you brought that.
I don't think anybody else. And I had to like, my dad went out and when I was a junior in high school and co-signed on a loan with me at the credit union for $2,500. And I got a Mac SE with 2 floppy disk drives. It had no hard drive. I got a separate 20 meg hard drive that cost $500.
Right.
And I spent a year and a half paying, and then I had to go out and get a job and toss pizzas and work in the food industry. And so it took me a year and a half to pay that off. So I came to college with a computer, and I had already like worked in school newspapers where we're using Macs to desktop publish and that kind of thing. And, so I had some experience with that, but so I came with that tool, but my dad bought the first Apple II Plus when it came out, and he bought the first Mac in '84. So we always had like something that was pretty new, and some things didn't, catch on, like the Laserdisc player, and some things did. But
some things absolutely did. Yeah.
But having that, like I understood how to get the print proof of whatever you were doing out on a laser printer that is going to be better quality than a dot matrix printer. And I think they had some things like at the labs on campus, but I don't think you could necessarily like go to Kinko's and print something.
Yeah, no. So
that was years later.
Yeah. I remember I didn't know the term halftone, and you did. And so when we wanted to put photos in the early issues, we went and got a halftone at the school newspaper. Like, we took them photos that like Nick took, like Nick Alfonso took pictures for us, and we took those photos to the school paper, and they halftoned it for us and charged us something for it. And then we cut them up and pasted them in. And then
and that was still like old school.
Yeah, that was pretty
old school camera to.
Yes, film camera,
conversion.
Absolutely. And when our sophomore year started, I went and bought a Mac Classic. So that's just 3 years after your SE, but already it was half the price you just mentioned paying. And it had a 40 meg hard drive on board, and it came with.
Did I say gig earlier, or did I say meg? I don't remember.
You said meg. No, you said meg.
Okay.
So a 40 meg hard drive on board, so it's got double the hard drive space. I later, like a year later, I paid to get the extra 2 megs of RAM because it only came with 2 on board, but it also came with the first TrueType printer, and it was Apple branded, but it was a Canon technically.
Oh yeah.
But it was the first time they had TrueType. It was the first time an inkjet printer could smooth things. It was like, I mean, it was just like, holy shit, because I had been used to the dot matrix in the labs.
Yeah.
And this was like not that, it was an amazing step up for like in my dorm room, everything's smooth. And
it was an inkjet printer, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was inkjet. Yeah. Yeah,
But True-
it was a Canon
True
inkjet
Type
with
and-
an Apple brand. Yeah,
Yeah,
and True Type was the
and-
brand new. Yeah, True Type came on a separate set of like 4 floppies,
Yeah,
and you had to install the fonts as either True Type or Dot Matrix.
right.
So
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So-
I forgot about that.
and then somebody we knew gave us a copy of
PageMaker.
It wasn't called. It was called PageMaker then, right? Yes. Yeah, it was PageMaker.
Adobe
Yeah.
Adobe had PageMaker, and then there was, I mean, all the pros were using Quark Express, which
Aldus
Yeah,
had
Quark.
which
PageMaker.
reigned
And Adobe hadn't
until-
bought it yet. It was a
Yeah.
different company, and Adobe bought it later because when Adobe bought it, they turned it into InDesign. But Aldus was that company, and yeah. So we were. I don't know. It was very DIY, and it was very like I spent a lot of time at the Kinko's, and we were hand binding everything, either hand stapling with the big long stapler, or once we finally went to square binding, we're painting the padding compound, like the glue that is usually on the end of like a notepad or whatever. We're painting that in to glue the pages together. I mean, we had more time than money.
Totally. Well, it was, we could get the point is we could get a good galley, and we could get a good like camera ready proof that we could, however it was mass produced after that, by mass produced, I mean, we might make 50 or 100 copies, which I think we did at Kinko's once or twice for the first
we did
that
for issue 0.
That's
we
right.
Did,
that one was saddle
that was the only saddle stitched. Yeah, that was saddle stitched. We had the big stapler. We'd get a spoon from the dorm cafeteria, so our fingers wouldn't get messed up from folding in because at first we didn't have. Yeah, that's right. At first we didn't have the big stapler, so we'd staple down into a phone book.
Yes.
Pull it out and then bend the staple prongs over with the spoon.
It worked great though.
Yeah.
But at the
we did 100 of those, and then we did 50 more, or we did 50 and we did 100 more. Yeah, something like that. And when we were selling them for $1, they sold like crazy. Yeah.
I don't even know if I have a copy of that one still.
I have both versions. I have a copy. Yeah, because there's the first one, the inner cover was a little fuzzier, and then you got True Type, and it got smoother. And
well, I think that we were doing. I mean, I guess for our listeners, the encapsulation of what we were doing with the magazine was there had not really been an indie zine that was doing fiction and poetry,
and we were pretty fed up with what was happening with the school's publication. Like it kind of let us down.
Yeah, the university had of course, and because we had a creative writing program, had an undergrad literary magazine that you could submit to, and
Prairie Margins.
Was that? Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
and
Prairie Margins.
And the university also published Mid-American Review, which is still
which was fairly, that was
fairly well renowned, nationally known literary journal, and still tough to get into. Still a great publication, but there was not much on the indie scene in a small town, especially where you're really just taking your zines to wherever you might be able to sell something on consignment, or sitting by the cash register and we essentially had like a comic book store, 2 music stores, a coffee shop, and
then there was another coffee shop also later, but it was like a couple of years later. But yeah, Grounds for Thought was the coffee shop, and Kelly Wicks, the owner, was a great supporter. He'd host our readings, and I have a couple of articles still, like newspaper clippings from when I was a boy, news was on the paper. So I got a couple of things there, and every time anything about the publishing that we were doing and some other people were doing would come up, everybody went to Kelly because Kelly was the distributor effectively. I mean, his coffee shop was where you sold the majority of what you were going to sell if it was like artsy, literary, whatever. But Mad Hatter, the record store, sold it for us. I don't think Finders ever did anything for us. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't remember.
I don't think
seems like there was another bookstore or something that might have done some things.
Yeah.
But
there were
I feel like there had been a couple indie zines that had come out, like 1 or 2 issues and had been around. Were just like leftover copies, and I feel like when we started, I think a lot of people were encouraged to do their own thing, and
absolutely.
There were a lot more. There were a lot more things, and I think like the technology was becoming available that people could do. Could do things, and so we did what I was telling somebody the backstory about the magazine the other day when I was at our writing conference, and I was like, well, it actually. At least my interpretation of it was when Matt and I started talking about doing a literary magazine, I proposed the name for it, and I'm sure Matt was like, what? That's very long and complicated.
Well, I do remember though,
and I'm sure I had to explain it.
Yeah, and
I had to explain it, but
so Dean, are you aware of like where the title came from and all that?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So Andrew, how about you tell us about the Haunter of the Dark?
Okay. I don't want to dwell too much on Lovecraft because he gets so much freaking attention.
Yeah.
And he was not a great guy. He wasn't the worst, but he was not a great guy. So the Lovecraft story, The Haunter in the Dark, has a character who, I forget whatever seaside town he's in, finds some artifacts that can I think it's the Shining Trapezohedron he finds in the belfry of an old church that has a cult in it. He finds it. And he, of course, is writing down this whole story about everything that's happened to him, and the story concludes with him at his desk, writing about how there's this evil elder god that is going to come get him, and is only light can stop him, and he's sitting at his desk with the windows open in this little seaside town. He can't escape. And then there's a blackout, and I guess candlelight doesn't work. So he's trying to write, and of course he rather foolishly is just like writing down his last few breaths as I hear it coming, hell, wind, titan blur, the 3 low burning eye, and then trails off with ellipses at the end of the story. So certainly, at least at that time, having read some weird fiction, like that whole line was such a weird jumble of thoughts and combination of words and ideas that I was just like, this is great. Like, it doesn't.
Yeah, right.
And was definitely, so for me, it was what we were doing, I felt like was the choice to make the magazine like that was a pretty intentional subversive thing, because we were both in a university creative writing department, and I'd had mixed experiences. I definitely had professors and workshops and situations where genre writing was not allowed here, and some professors were pretty on board with it. They were like, whatever you want to write. But I would, of course, find that in workshops, people who didn't read genre could not really give you the feedback that you wanted. And of course,
as soon as a ghost or an alien or a monster or a guy with a fedora and a whip. If any of that shit showed up, forget it. Like, you're obviously not a serious literary writer.
But I think that was really interesting at the time, because we were at a university that had one of the first popular culture departments in the country, and a pretty major American culture studies department, and also
the library was massive.
Yeah. Also, I took classes on. I took a class that was Ursula Le Guin and William Gibson. I don't know if it was the same professor. There was also a class that was entirely on Dune, but there were, and I feel like there were a couple other ones, but there were
my film classes were like crazy like that. I took French and Italian cinema of the 50s. I took silent gangster movies of the 20s. Like, it was like,
there were definitely some geeks on the faculty.
Even my cultural anthropology,
it was pretty cool.
Walked around the mall there wearing a Betty Page t-shirt just to mess with the locals. There were some things happening, right? And there was like the crazy music scene. Like, okay, there's sort of your typical funk rock kind of stuff, like Big Hunk of Cheese, in that Chili Peppers-ish kind of vein. And there were metal bands, and there were all kinds of other things happening. But there was also everything that dude Scott did, like Satan Tortilla and all that.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, all that weird noise art.
Yeah.
Like, there was a dude in one of those groups.
Yeah. 45.
45. That's awesome, dude. That's like gold. Holy shit. That's awesome.
You have a gun? You have a handgun that plays music? What?
but yeah, like there was some weird stuff happening in Bowling Green, and it was a legitimate kind of, of course there should be weird stuff in Bowling Green because of just what you described. And yet, there were stodgy people in that creative writing program. It was hit or miss depending on, who was doing what and where they were coming from. Sometimes the oldest and most apparently crusty dudes would be the ones who are like, yeah, right, science fiction, that's so neat, it's interesting, whatever. And then there'd be people who seemed like, on the outside they were kind of a little more edgy or whatever, and they'd be like, oh no, poetry is like this. And
right.
and that was wacky to me. I mean, that was just such a strange dichotomy there. Okay, well, have you seen the Wikipedia page for Three Low Burning Eye? I linked it. Did you read it?
I haven't looked at it in a while.
Okay. It's interesting. It's worth taking a look. Yeah, like I think I know that captures. I may have edited it at one point, but I'm not sure.
I can't actually remember if I may have started it at one point as, I think it was a stub. It was a stub because I didn't necessarily want to have one about the magazine, but at some point I started it as a stub just to relate to the literary connection of where the phrase came from, and the connection. Because the other thing that I think is really interesting about Haunter of the Dark is
the Robert Bloch connection.
Yeah, the Robert Bloch connection, because he was a young writer and who was a fan and also starting to write and corresponding with Lovecraft, and they did a couple of, I can't remember the order of everything, but they did a couple of stories kind of back and forth. And so the character of Robert Blake in the Haunter of the Dark story is kind of a I'm gonna kill you, my young friend, in this story.
Right.
And
Robert Bloch goes on to write Psycho, among other
he's well known for Psycho,
significant pieces of horror literature. Like Bloch was a big deal later on in a much more commercially successful way than Lovecraft.
Yeah, I hope he made some bucks off of that, but
yeah,
because he did a lot of really, I think he was a pretty interesting guy, personality, and pretty
Absolutely.
prolific, interesting writer. But so I think I mean, the point of the origin of Three Little Burning Eye as a college kind of literary magazine is that the story comes from weird fiction and comes from genre and everything that all the stories and poetry, and we even did some comics, like some comics in there.
Mark did a comic, Jason Holmgren, who went on to a pretty good kind of, I don't know, furry adjacent RPG and novel publishing career. He had done a comic strip in the BG News with squirrels trying to take over the world, and or at least Bowling Green, and then I saw him at Gen Con in Indianapolis in 2002, and he had a whole publishing thing going on.
He's got like
novels and books. So but we published one of his stories. Well, he did the cover, actually. He did the cover of issue 0, and he did a couple other things for us. I published one of his comics in Vinyl Elephant. But Mark did comics for us. You did a comic. And a lot of the comics we did were digital. Like it was, Mac Paint and
we had some of each. Some were directly there, and some were, like photocopied and then halftoned and put it. But I think we did. I think we did like 3 or 4 issues of the original one, and you started doing Vinyl Elephant magazine, which had much more.
So I started. So we did issue 0, which was the little saddle stitch thing, and then we did like the Perfect Bound 1 and 2. And by the end of 2, I knew where you wanted to head, and we had to charge money for this big professional looking thick multi-page. It was like, we aspired to something professional, and it was like $5 a copy, and $5 now is like a candy bar. But then $5
30 years
was like
ago, it was a
now.
lot.
It was a big deal,
like a real book.
It was like a real book, exactly. And so we split off, so that, because I didn't want you to stop doing what you had as your vision for Three Little Burning Eye, but I knew that like I was in a whole different place. Plus, I was a poetry student more than a fiction student, and I published a ton of like what I think now would probably be like ergodic poetry, like which means you have to work hard to understand it and figure out how to read it in the first place. And so that wasn't really where we were going with Three Little Burning Eye. So I went my way. Three Little Burning Eye stuck around. And then you took it digital once it made sense to do that. And, the fact that we graduated in you graduated what, in 92? December of 93? 92. When did you graduate?
I mean,
I was 92.
August of 92.
I was technically class of 94, but I did 2 full time.
You graduated August of 93. I graduated
93.
December of 93. And Dean, you graduated in normal time 92. Yeah.
Well, you were before.
Yeah, I was.
Dean's the old guy.
I'm the old guy.
Who looks the youngest of the 3 of us.
And if I grow this out, it will be equally as white, I think. So.
And we'll leave a link to a later episode, because amidst all this going on, we were all in a band together.
Right. Yes. Right? Yes. Absolutely.
I've touched on that before. And
we talked about.
We never normally go on tangents on this.
No, not a one.
We stick
rigid and
straight. Then you brought me in.
We stick to everything like very linear.
And then you brought me in, and I'm like, let me tell you about laser discs in the 70s.
Andrew, no, that's why. That's why we can just fall right into this conversation, because that is par for our course. Is
we could call the podcast "Never Not Tangents."
Yes. Well, but it's always educational. Dean, did you know about the 70-pound laser disc player? Because I didn't.
I did not.
Right. See, we're putting good back into the world.
I also didn't know what I'm gonna botch this. Epitoptic poetry. I don't know what word you said.
Ergodic.
Ergodic.
I didn't actually know that word.
See, I learned a new word today, so that's good.
Yeah, I learned that word around like 2002. You know, a good 12 years, 11 years after
after
I was
the
doing it.
undergrad.
I was like, oh, this is the word I've been looking for. You know, like, yeah.
Well, I think I wanted to say one other thing that was going on at the give people an idea about what was going on with publishing and genres and that kind of thing. And in the early 90s, there was a newsletter called Fact Sheet 5.
Yeah.
Which I'm pretty sure the publisher of that is still I don't think I've met her, is still a member of the Horror Writers Association, which I would finally join like in, I don't know, 98 or something like that. But like the way to find market listings of where to send your stories, you would either go out and purchase Writer's Digest, the Writer's Digest Writer's Guide, Writer's Marketplace.
Yeah.
They'd publish a new, and anybody could submit a listing to them. You didn't have to didn't have to pay for it. You didn't have to be a New York publisher or a well-funded literary magazine or something, but there would be a big volume, and those expanded later into novel and short story writers market and like an illustrators market and that kind of thing. So to where to find your, unless you were like opening a well-known publication like The Atlantic or Playboy or something and found the fine print of like, oh, I'm a fiction writer, I want to send a story to a place and here's where I send it. There were these small DIY just like newsletters and the commercial version of the Writer's Digest of where you would go to find and what you would find in there could be something like Three Low Burning Eye that, you know, has got a circulation of 50 to 300, or it could be I can't remember what horror magazines were out at the time, but there were certainly the big science fiction.
Rue Morgue was one.
Rue Morgue was probably around, and it did a lot of things. And there were the best, definitely a sci-fi.
Alfred Hitchcock there was an Alfred Hitchcock mystery magazine kind of thing.
They're still going
into horror. Yeah.
So there was that happening, and otherwise it was just like, yeah, we didn't really have email until and there was no internet yet. So you would find out about something from somewhere, whether it's a magazine or this kind of newsletter, and then you would subscribe to it and then find that kind of thing. So we started pretty local as far as who we were publishing, and then got more people from.
Yeah. Once we got into Fact Sheet 5, once we had proof of concept with Issue 0, we were publishing people from Europe and England and occasionally Australia, definitely Canada, and throughout the country. Because as soon as you put something, and this is where like it was a necessity for us because we were getting so much stuff in our dorm mailboxes that we had to go to the post office to get a post office box. Yeah. And then we had to figure out what size post office box made the most sense, because how frequently were we going to go check it? And and that, like, I can't even imagine having a post office box now, but but that was like such a thing then. And we were corresponding with people, which was like weeks long in the, you get the thing, you read through this stack of stuff, you respond to people, oh, we'd like to see this with maybe some revisions, what about this and this, and like it's a month later before anything comes back to you. There was no immediacy to it, but it didn't matter. Like as soon as you put something in Fact Sheet 5, the flood of submissions was nuts. And then we didn't do really any ad trades in Three Lobe Burning Eye. In Vinyl Elephant, I did a bunch of ad trades with other magazines.
Right.
And so like the inside back cover of the Vinyl Elephant was always like, here are other magazines that are kind of, and it'd be basically they run my ad, I run their ad, and back and forth.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how I got Vinyl Elephant into like Mad Hatter. He said, well, I'll sell this here for you and not take a cut if you put an ad for the record shop in the back of the magazine.
He was the Mad Hatter. I feel like he was,
Billy.
He was always wearing a big hat.
Yeah, Billy with the hat. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Well, but okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. So how much time you've got you've got a career that's not this. Yeah. This is not your bread and butter. This is not paying the rent, that kind of thing. So in a week or a month or a year, how much time goes into your Three Lobe Burning Eye at this point in your life?
Well, I've been, it ebbs and flows really. And it's changed over the last, my God, 25 years. It still seems like impossible, but, and since the genre version of Three Lobed that everybody knows has come out, we've had some years where we were publishing quarterly, some years where we published one issue, some years where we had 1 or 2 years where we didn't publish at all, but we were always, until a few months ago, I was always open for submissions all the time. No like windows or were closed to catch up or anything. And I would say until maybe the first 2/3 of that time, actually I have a spreadsheet that I'll look for at some point. The history of the first 7 years of contributors is kind of lost to older versions of emails, but I have like rough numbers of how many submissions I started to receive and how the magazine grew and such. So, I would say I don't think it's busting any big myth here to say that I don't read every story all the way through. Often I know within the first page or so whether it is something that's a good fit and for the magazine and is worth continuing. Whether it's something that's like, well, maybe not quite, but maybe a rewrite or
inside baseball, aspiring writers, right here, right now.
Yeah, I would say until. I probably read all the stories all the way through, but was, receiving a couple hundred submissions a year. And I think within the last 5 years, at least, it really started to get to the point where it was like at least a dozen submissions a day.
Wow.
Which is
that's email, right?
Yeah.
That's all coming digitally. Yeah.
That's all coming digital. Like, I don't think we ever did like actual print versions. But I'll look for that. I'll look for that list of numbers. But so in terms of time, I'm probably spending a couple hours a week reading submissions at various levels, whether it's like first time coming in or I've kept them for a week or a month. Like, it still happens with digital submissions. The frequency of the magazine has been 3 issues per year in the last few years, and I think has become more. There was a while where we were doing two 2 issues of 6 stories. Now we do 3 issues of 4 stories, which is the same 12 stories released, new stories released every year. But it's definitely, I definitely found that if you do 2 issues a year, people kind of feel like you've dropped away. Like if you don't have a monthly or an every other month frequency, and you know, so boy, I don't know. I've not really done the whole putting the whole time together, because it would probably drive me mad. But it's a couple hours per week, and then it becomes more as you get closer to publication, and you know, so then actually working on edits with the writers takes more time on those specific stories. And I work on the artwork, and I work on all the editing and the coding for the pages, and we started doing audio versions a couple years ago, so editing those and putting those together, just getting all the elements up there. So it all has an ebook conversions and stuff like that. So there are many steps to just releasing one issue and getting all the stuff ready to release. And you know, when it gets down to a couple weeks before, it's more than a couple hours per week. And then we do an anthology of all the stories every other year. 12 stories times 2, 24 stories in a good, here's the latest one, in a good size trade paperback. So, you know, you can see they've all been about, so that like the math works out to be that whether you have stories that are, whether you have a couple of flash fiction stories, or you have some 7,500 word stories, or most short fiction stories fall from 2,000 to 5,000 words generally. So there's a bit, usually about the same amount that people read on screen, and then when it comes together in a book, it's usually gets another edit when it goes into the book, not just for formatting for the book, but to make sure we didn't like miss anything. Or occasionally something will happen, like occasionally something may happen, that something sensitive happens in culture and it was in the story, and you're like, hey, writer, I know we published this last year, but like maybe this pronoun might not be right for this character anymore. What do you think about it? And they're like, I totally agree. Let's change that. That's good. So there's sometimes like idea editing too, but not entirely changing the whole thing.
So do you pay your writers now? Because so that was like when we were young, we didn't pay them. It was like you got published, so we gave you a copy of the magazine, and you retain the rights. So now that we've published it once, you can do whatever you want with it somewhere else.
We for the last couple of years, our pay rate has been an honorarium of $100 for a piece of fiction that is short story length, 1,500 words to 7,500 words, and if it's flash fiction, I think it's $30 or $35. And we only publish fiction, so we don't have poetry or interviews or reviews or anything. And it's been at that rate, which, you know, there's small press has just been up and down, but like, I think and there's always so many small presses that are doing magazines and anthologies and author collections and novels. I think novellas have been really big in the last couple of years, especially in genre writing, which I think speaks to people's attention span, but also it being a kind of excited, kind of forgotten length, because novels that were popular from the early 1900s to like mid-century were short. They were all, you could go back and read old science fiction novels and crime novels and stuff like that, and like 40,000 words was there were not many epics, and 60 was considered long. Now if you're pitching a novel to a publishing, especially a publishing house, like they're like, we want 100K and we want a trilogy. Like we want it left. That's what people want, because we've got to sell the hardbacks and we got to get that out to people. So there's been a really cool market. So novelettes and novellas are like 7,500 words to like 40K. So there's a huge range, but they are small books, and some people are doing ebook versions, but it's also, I think, been more affordable for small presses to do novellas as small books that they can afford to print and publish. And some places do things as limited runs, like they're like, we're one of the writers who I published her first story, Nadia Bolkin. Her first collection came out years ago, and she is just like one of the best weird fiction writers around. She just released a novella through a small press, and it sold out in 2 days, like 150 or 200 copies. Like, so and so there are some small presses that only do novellas. There are several magazines that do novellas off to the side, and so there's a lot of stuff going on, but so many small presses doing really interesting stuff, especially in genre, and a mix of online and some print editions, and it's really hard to to of course guess like what's going to be successful, right? Like there are definitely some small presses that set a plan for publishing 4 or 6 titles per year, and there are some that only do like 1 title a year. There are some, so for the longest time with Three Lobed, I think the first 10 years I tried to do a pretty consistent schedule of like 3 or 4 per year, but eventually I got to the point where no matter how many submissions came in, I didn't release another issue until I found 6 stories that, I was planning on 2 issues per year until I found 6 stories that were good. And I would say not until more recently, for 20 some years, I did not necessarily solicit stories from people. I just had submission guidelines up, and people would find it. And I think even so, one of the big reasons for doing a Kickstarter recently is because that even though we have a Patreon, even though we have subscriptions, they're not enough. Even though we don't do, like, we only do a print book and in pretty limited print quantity, to get the money to pay writers more than $100 a story and get them to 8 or 10 cents per word, which is considered pro rates by the professional writing organizations, Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, Association. It's not America anymore. Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, Horror Writers Association, and Romance Writers Association, Mystery Writers Association too. Like, they all agree based on what cost of living is and what the history of writing a story when in the 20s, if you sold a story to a major publication, you could actually like afford rent and meals, and much like minimum wage, like 100 years of publishing, like the cost of paying writers has not gone up at all. So despite what our readership may be electronically, or what our subscriptions are and that kind of thing, it doesn't, and Patreon, it doesn't pay enough to pay all our writers 8 cents a word and make that jump. So that's been the big reason. I was like, what if we try to get there? And it turns out it's not unusual in the small press pro magazine business. There are several magazines that do a Kickstarter every year to release 6 issues per year, or 12 or 4, and they'll ask for a big chunk, which is usually, I mean, honestly, is usually between 10 and 20K to pay writers, to pay nonfiction writers to do interviews and reviews, and audio readers to record stories and do podcasts, also pay a cover artist, and pay for your server, pay for your web host and your server space, and all that kind of thing. And also so I tried to keep costs pretty lean on the magazine in a lot of ways, one of which included like having a submission system, which my friend and I wrote a PHP script and figured out a way to do that, and eventually it just got too big. The amount of submissions coming in were like too big for where it was all funneling into, and I was like losing submissions and had to tell people, like, they'd say, "Hey, what happened to the story I sent to you 6 months ago?" And you're like, "I'm so sorry, I didn't get that." And eventually we could like find them on the back server, but sometimes, just through human error, we wouldn't find something when going through the backlog and that kind of thing. So it turns out that a lot of pro magazines also use a submission system that a writer wrote from the ground up, and is a content management system for accepting submissions, and especially with the bigger magazines that have a lot of slush readers, they can parse out, because they're getting. So I would say I get, without looking at that spreadsheet, I get 3,000 some submissions per year.
Wow.
And
a day.
And I'm pretty small, and I still do all the reading myself. But there's several of the pro magazines that are paying pro rates are getting like 100 a day at least, and they have anywhere from 3 to 10 submission readers who are just having to, and they're all volunteer, right? So they're all reading 10 submissions a day and learning about the industry and that kind of, which is kind of like, some form of just like learning, being an intern kind of, but hopefully without the bad parts of that. But like, right. Overall publishing is not, is just like not profitable, really. It's really hard. So it's pretty telling that 2 major magazines, Apex Magazine and Uncanny Magazine, which Uncanny just did their year 11 Kickstarter that finished right before we started ours. And they, I think they got like 200% of their funding goal. So, they could stretch to add more content and do more issues, and I can't remember what Apex's was, but they got more. And there's a couple other ones. So it's been interesting as my first crowd raise. Well, I have the Patreon, but it doesn't bring much in, honestly. And so it needed one of the big reasons for doing this Kickstarter was to, you know, pay the writers first. Let's get them 8 cents a word for 3 issues next year. We'll add 1 story to each issue, and it was really like the first time I made a concerted effort to go out and contact writers who had been published in the magazine, some of which have gotten kind of big, and see if they would like to, you know, if they'll contribute an original story for next year. And, you know, like, fingers crossed, if we get published, then I can pay you 8 cents a word and that kind of thing. So
yeah.
So
it's Thomas Ha, one of those guys. Is that his name? His last name's Ha. Yeah. I looked at his website because he was listed, and like there very prominently, he's got all the cover art of all of his most recent publications, and there's Three Low Burning High, like right as you go by, and seems like he's doing pretty well. So
he's doing great. I think just in the last couple of years, I think was he nominated for a
he had a bunch of
Hugo or Nebula.
Yeah.
Vajra Chandrasekhara, who I published 3 stories by years ago. His first novel finally came out last year, and it has won like every award. Okay. In the last year, his second novel just came out like 2 months ago. He's an incredible writer. I very sheepishly sent an email to him and was like, "What do you think? Would you write another story?" He was like, "Heck yeah, I'll totally do it."
That's cool. That's
Nadia
awesome.
Balkan, who I mentioned earlier, was like, "Oh yeah, I'll totally do it." So I've essentially got a dozen writers ready to write a new story for next year, and paying them and people ongoing is the main reason for the Kickstarter, but also like paying for a submission system that can handle the bulk of everything. And I've also, just we've got stretch goals, of course, in Kickstarter. So if we get another 3K or 5K, we'll do another issue, because I've got more writers that I've pinged, and they're really excited, which are people that we've not published before, and I think are some pretty exciting people. So I'm hoping that sometime so we've got like 4 days left of the 30, and with the Kickstarter methodology is, if you hit your funding goal, you get the money. If you don't reach your funding goal, you get nothing. It's an all or nothing thing. So if we're like $500 away from 10,000, if we don't in 4 days if we get $499, it'll be like, you get nothing for next year.
Yeah.
But so we'll see how it goes. It's been pretty exciting to see, because you also see a lot of new, just like the love from the community of people sharing on social media, like, "Hey, let's help this magazine out." Like, I see it with the pro magazines, and they're getting like, they're like hitting stretch goals of 25K, and I'm like, "Oh my God, you guys do this every year? You've been doing this for a decade and making all this money." And I was just like, wow, if I can make it to 10, that would be great. But I think it has been really awesome just to see people sharing it, and and people discovering it, and hopefully like reading the issues that are there, and subscribing, and, you know, whether they're just like trying a subscription now for $10 or whatever, or they just want to help out, like. And there's also been, of course, a huge migration of people from the formerly known as Twitter to Blue Sky and Instagram and some other things, but
Mastodon,
Mastodon as well. So I think our readership is getting better, at least is getting bigger. So I'm
Right.
hoping that like if we have to, we'll get more subscriptions and we won't have to. We may have to Kickstarter again next year for the following year.
Right.
It may just be. It seems like it is kind of par for the course for a lot of magazines, but you know, maybe we don't have to do as much. I know we definitely have to prove ourselves to new readerships, but yeah, it's pretty cool. But I think I don't know if I mean obviously maybe I don't know, maybe through talking about it, but like the transition, it's been to me like I have not thought about our origin of the magazine that much because it's been 25 years of being this other thing, but it's been really exciting to just work on this thing that is
Right.
a passion project, but that it has an audience and it gets you know, gets some kudos from people and gets interest and I went to StokerCon, which is the big conference for the Horror Writers Association, and just like Worldcon and World Fantasy, they're held in different cities each year, and they have it. And the Stoker Award is the big award. And I met for the first time 6 people that I had published in the magazine.
Cool.
Some of whom are pretty big, and you know, like one guy was like Lifetime Achievement Award, and he'd been sending to me for years, and finally we clicked on a story, and you know, I was of course like, I just wanted to say hi, like I can't. You're so amazing, but you know, meeting tons of people who are like a lot of people know what the magazine is, and that's cool. But at the same time, we're still pretty small compared to what some of the pro magazines are, and there's a huge gulf culturally between what a pro magazine is that has been around for the last decade or so compared to like, you know, Hitchcock's and Asimov's and Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction looked like it was folding after I don't know how many decades, but they just came out with a new issue, which we'll see what happens there. But it's there are at any given time not many pro magazines that have a large print circulation at all anymore, or you know, like our online have online readership and ours and have digital like EPUB subscriptions and that kind of thing that are paying pro rates that are, you know, one or two of those editors, it is their full-time job, but they also they're making enough that they can do that, but they also have a staff of, you know, maybe a dozen people doing different things. So I hope to I still do it all myself, but I hope to at some point bring more first readers and such in, but that all depends on how things go with the funding and that kind of thing.
So tell us about the tiers in the Kickstarter a little bit, because I was curious. Like, there's some stuff I was like, I wouldn't have thought that was a Kickstarter thing for this. And then you got some other people who are like, is this person like associated? Like, why is this person, you know, who's offering this service if you donate at this level or whatever? So tell us a little bit about how the Kickstarter is structured and who some of these other people
are. Kickstarter, I mean, in my time, I've only been as a backer. I've only been on Kickstarter for the last few years, and it looks like I've backed maybe 25 projects, which are usually literary projects, but also done like a indigenous role-playing game and some short films and a couple of different genre projects. and most of them in smaller amounts, something from $5 to $25, that kind of thing. And so I may have gone overboard offering a lot of different rewards and weird specific things, but I did take some cues from some other magazines that as different rewards they've offered something like story critiques from writers, or like a virtual meet and greet where people can usually writers can get like a career chat with another writer. So there have been some things. The story critiques, I was really surprised, went really quickly. Because I think they were at the $150 reward, and it's so I think the first 3 or 4 I had to go back and ask some other writers, hey, do you think you'd have time to do this sometime next year? And they were like, yeah, sure. So those I think have all gone. I might add 1 or 2 more from me as an editor, but the Kickstarter says, do 5 to 10 different rewards that people they have the option of just putting in any amount. A backer has the option of putting in any amount with no rewards, and some people will choose things depending on. With something like a magazine, a subscription is a pretty easy thing to do, but I definitely saw some other magazines do autographed books, or one of our contributors who's been in the magazine, Christy DeMeester, who has been in the magazine a couple times and has a couple books out. What is it? A Pretty Smile was a big one that came out 2 years ago, and she just posted that she finished the sequel to it. She does candles.
Yeah, candles. I'm glad you brought up the candles, because
she does candles that are all horror themed, and so she'll mix different aromas and spices that have to do with whatever, and do little photo shoots with them, and she's pretty awesome. You should check out. I mean, her writing is great, but her candles are also awesome. That will have to do with, they're all a horror movie, or anything from here's a Friday the 13th. Here's a I have ordered from her and asked her to do a custom scent for the Rare Exports movie.
Yeah.
For a Christmas gift. So that was pretty cool. So she's doing a custom thing for Three Little Burning Eye. I don't know what the spices are going to be, but so and then all the critiques are by writers who have contributed to the magazine. There's some writers are contributing autographed books or ebooks, or one of our writers translates manga.
Okay.
And so she put in some bundles of
I saw that.
Books. Yeah. She was like, I'm really excited to do spicy or not spicy manga.
I saw that. Yeah.
Okay, I look forward to seeing what titles you put together. Yeah.
That's cool. Okay.
So stuff is kind of weird. I was honestly hoping for some other weird crafts or something, which I have one on there that's some bookmarks made of reclaimed wood, where the artist Rue X will do some original drawings of monsters and stuff, and actually burn them in.
What a great segue. What a perfect segue. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this mysterious Rue X? And I also I looked up Ruex on the web, and there's a South American guy who's a musician, but I don't think he goes by Ruex. It's just, I think it's Rooks, but it's REWX. Yeah. So.
I haven't looked it up. I'll go find him. This is Ruex. He's not often in public. So I
wondered if there'd be a costume change.
Yeah, no, he's gonna have a hat.
Don't you have a hat or something?
I don't have anything. I'll just be like this.
I think Google Meet you can do like little.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I'll add something.
Yeah,
there's filters or something.
Yeah. And there's the reactions too. I turned mine off, but maybe we should turn yours on.
I mean, I haven't talked about this much, but one appeal to me for doing the magazine originally was that I wanted to explore doing some artwork and have been doing the cover art for the magazine since we started. And you can definitely look back at some of the older stuff and see some pretty beginning techniques and metaphors and ideas and stuff like that, but also enjoyed not trying to develop one particular style along the way, to try some different approaches to presenting a fantasy element or a horror scene as a cover image. All of the artwork I've done, at least so far, has been digital and using different programs and techniques. I've had a pad, not an iPad, but a Wacom pad, pressure sensitive, for I don't know, the last 15 years or so. And originally you had to get certain programs that were better for that, but now things like Photoshop have pressure sensitive tools, and there are a lot of I collect brushes, different brush sets from, and you get what you pay for, honestly. Like, you know, the people who are doing digital art and understand like how to do conceptual art and how to do fine art and stuff on digital programs, like design their own brushes and make them mimic natural media. So, you know, doing like little sketch work and doing airbrushing and also shading and all sorts of, just like the shapes of brush. It's taken me, like, I'm not saying that I'm any good at all, but I've definitely got a better process by which, you know, I develop ideas more and like how it turns out more than I used to. And so I usually thumbnail 25 different ideas for every cover. I'll just take a piece of paper and draw thumbnail shapes and put together blocking different elements and such. Sometimes it's a monster or a character or a building or something, and then I'll do larger versions, starting to add some detail and figure out how light works and that kind of thing. And occasionally I'll just do that on a piece of paper with an old school pencil, and occasionally something will get good enough that I'll scan that in and then develop from there. Or very rarely will I actually like use sketch tools on the computer itself and do like a digital sketch originally. But usually I'm figuring out shapes and stuff, and and so and then that's also one of the things that I probably spend more time on than I should, and could get more done and have time for my life, because that takes up a lot of time when getting to the, getting the issue finalized and getting it to release and that kind of thing. But
right on.
But we hope to. We'll see how things go with what happens with our publication and frequency, because we hope to have some guest artists and that kind of thing. But it's also a whole nother. I definitely see other magazines run into that, where like they may have a regular artist or a favorite artist, and they can't always produce on schedule because they have other obligations, or like or they're in demand and they're not affordable anymore, or
right.
All sorts of things can happen. So some of it is doing the art myself is about control and schedule, and some of it is about just being a visual artist. It's a mix of. It's a good break. It's a good break for me creatively from writing and editing. It's something that I can, because I can't write or edit. I can't enjoy music when I'm writing or editing. Okay, music that has lyrics.
Right. Yeah.
I can listen to instrumental music. Soundtracks are really great for editing, for actually writing first drafts of a story or a novel or that kind of thing. But and classical music, but I can't actually like listen to the new bands or stuff on my playlist that I really like enjoy or sing along with anything if I'm actually reading words or creating words and that kind of thing. So
right on. Okay, so here's as we sort of start taking it home. Well, Dean, do you have any we're digesting all of this, Andrew.
Okay, and I'm just rambling.
but like you're sort of anticipating some of where I would go. But Dean, is there anything that you want to ask? Because I've got a sort of turn the bus here kind of question, but I can wait.
No. I mean, I appreciate you deep diving into all of this and and a little peek at your sort of process and stuff. And obviously, just we don't get. I mean, it's been a few years since I saw you, and then it was many years before that, and so
I know we haven't gotten to just chat.
I know, yeah,
yeah.
But no, and I think for me, I mean, I kind of knew like leading into this episode, I would be sort of the quiet in the background part. I was while so many people I was friends with at Bowling Green were creative writing majors for some reason. But it was like, that is a world that I'm not, super familiar with. So this is definitely interesting just to hear about. I based on my current busyness, I'm probably not going to suddenly take up reading a whole ton of horror fiction anytime real soon, unless I don't sleep ever again. But but no, I based on some of the stuff we're doing. For me, it all comes down to time. I'm like, I squeeze way too much stuff into my day, and then I'm like, I honestly would love to dive in, and then I'm like, okay, so how do I squeeze? Because also I would probably get really into it, and then like, okay, now how am I squeezing in 10 hours a week of this on top of
right.
I'm gonna save some of that for retirement, I think. And so, if we're gonna guys, because they're I will play catch up on a lot of reading and stuff. But
well, okay, so given all of that, like the couple of I'm gonna kind of combine three of my questions together. But okay. I guess
Three-lobe burning question.
Yes. You know what? I've been dying to. I already referenced the copulating crabs once, and but I just remember one of them walked up to you and said, "Are you that three-lobed burning guy?"
Yes, yes. Oh my God.
Well,
That's great.
I'm one of them. Yeah, we started a zine, short for
Mhm.
magazine, when zines were like, "Hey, this is a big thing," and we sparked a little bit of a group of people that we knew who were, our peers, maybe a year or two younger than us, started doing their own zines, and like Ivan did his blue-haired monk thing, and Rita and Scott Galloway and like all these different people did magazines around the time, like right after we did Three Love Burning Eye, because we were just like, you can do it. And then it was like, hell yeah, we can do it. And so people started. But like, I just read an article today in which a person said, I bought this magazine and I read this and in parentheses, and I paid $13 exclamation point. And it's like magazines, $13. Oh my God! Meanwhile, like a candy bar is $2.50. Like so, there's just such a change.
What happened?
Right. Look out. But there's such a change in what media is, what new media is. And you're talking about subscriptions, and Patreon is a thing, Kickstarter is a thing. You've got people reading, and you've got EPUBs, and like you're producing the work in these multiple formats just to get the thing out, and then you're giving it away free, arguably. And you're not, ads don't seem to be a thing for you. It's not a way that you've gone, whereas like that's like the magazine paradigm. If you take that to its nth degree, it's like, we give you the paper thing because enough people have paid for ads, and that's how Google and Meta and everybody else is still making money, is ads. So number one, how does it feel to be a magazine when, quote unquote, the magazine is dead? Two, how does it like if you weren't doing a magazine, what would it be? Or is there an evolution that you see, or is this something that you think like this serialized, regularly published kind of way that you're doing things is how you want to carry it on forward into the future?
Yeah. Well, I think that digital magazines, especially, and books, just like fiction survives pretty well. I think fiction is still doing pretty great in print. The way the big publishers work has not changed much in 100 years, where they make their money on the hardcover release because it is, they can charge more for it, and then a year later release the trade paperback. And all the big publishers, and as they merged, the big six became the big five, became the big four. They still bank on that model, and a couple big names making most of their money, right? Like the big names that are on the New York Times bestseller list and have one or two releases per year, and usually the novel. Yeah, Patterson, Stephen King, etc. So there's always going to be that, but they have a couple hundred mid-list and smaller and first-time writers, which occasionally you win the lottery. Like hopefully not in the Shirley Jackson sense, but for whatever reason, like people will gravitate toward a new book that's released, which may or may not be really good, at a big publisher or at a small press, and you'll sell 1,000 copies at a small press like in a week, and it'll get on awards lists, or you're with a big publisher, and And so there are a lot of things about publishing that haven't changed, but also I think, like, I know more and more people that digest books by listening to audiobooks, because they can do the rest of they can work, they can do their life, like, taking care of the pets and the kids and doing housework and stuff while they're listening to something, and they don't have to. But a lot of people are getting ebooks or subscriptions to magazines and reading there, and not keeping a lot of media, and not keeping a lot of bookshelves or that kind of thing. But I think reading is still. I think there's a myth that reading is diminishing and is not as exciting. And I still think there's a huge amount of print going on, but and there's a huge amount, definitely in the last 5-10 years, in the horror and science fiction and fantasy genres. The amount of small presses that are putting out incredible stuff that would never make it into the bigger houses. Like, they're just taking more chances in terms of story, certainly in terms of like characters and perspectives and writers. Like, you're getting more BIPOC writers, more Indigenous writers, more trans writers, more voices in small press, that would be like a big marketing thing with a big press. But you're getting more of that, and you're getting voices and perspectives that we just would not have seen, sadly, 20 years ago. And it's still just not enough. It's still tip of the iceberg. Like, 15, 20 years ago, there was like one Black science fiction anthology, and now there are many. And
Right.
there's a great Ukrainian speculative fiction collection called Embroidered Worlds. Just came out recently, or is coming out in the next month. There's been a couple Palestine anthologies. So there's, and some writers start out with one short story in a magazine or an anthology, but it does also seem to be the case that marketing a product, novels do better. It's pretty hard it took me 30 years to put, and I'm still working on a novel manuscript, but it took me 30 years to publish a book, and it's an author collection, and it's not huge at all. And even if in the small press you get some good buzz about something, like, chances are more people are going to read a novel by anyone than they are about. So I think short fiction is still pretty dwindled. But it's still like on fire. Like, there's so much great stuff going on. I feel like there are probably somewhere between half dozen and a dozen writers that I published a first story or one of their early stories, who in the last 20 years have become kind of a big deal, because they were great writers then and have gotten only better. But like, now everybody knows, in the horror community, everybody knows who Laird Barron is now.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Everybody knows who Nadia Bulkin is now. Chrissy DeMeester. Yeah, a number of people. But, and I know there's, not that I'm like the discoverer, but there are so many writers doing amazing stuff that may publish something once a year in any magazine or anthology, and then you may not see something by them for 2 or 3 years, but they're working on stuff, and they may work at that pace, or they may have 20 other things that they're sending out. And I mean, I as a writer am usually have 5 stories out looking around, but it honestly takes me 1 or 2 years to find a home for a story.
Mm.
And as an editor, I more and more understand that. It only took me 20 some years to understand that. On the other side, that you really it doesn't reflect your quality as a writer if you get a rejection, especially if they say you should send us more, because you as an editor and a publisher, you can only fit so many things in that anthology that you're putting together. I mean, theoretically, you could put however many pages and stories in there, but you only have a certain amount of time by deadline to get. These are the 4 stories or 6 stories that we're going to put in this issue, and it all has to get edited properly and get done and get out there and do that thing, whether it's online or has to get to the audio reader, or there's actually going to be a print edition that just backs it up more to what you can do. So I really love, to answer like, what do I see? That's kind of my big interpretation of publishing and genre, but what do I see for the magazine? I think like I still absolutely just love the written word and storytelling. And I still love short fiction. I still read more short fiction than I do novels. And like there are so many good magazines and small presses around, and anthologies, because they're more, it's not that they're nimble, they're just tight. They're just tight, and you can get so many. You read a collection, whether it's an author collection or an anthology of different writers, you get so many different ideas, perspectives, worlds, scares, all of these things going on by experiencing that. You can get an anthology and read a 3,000 word short story before you go to bed. You can also get a novel and read a chapter before you go to bed. Like, that's usually what I try to read: a story for not reading slush for the magazine, but a story for my enjoyment and research and just like keeping up with things per day. But that's not nearly enough. You got to read like a book of 20 stories to keep up with all that's going on, because there's so much good stuff. So as far as the magazine, I think I really like the tightness and the diversity of the story, both in terms of the stories that can be told, but also the voices. And so I really want to keep the magazine going that way. And I think it's also a reason for paying writers pro rates is that you have more of a chance of bigger writers or writers who are getting bigger, who expect to be paid pro rates. You have more of a chance of them sending you a story if you're actually paying that, right? Like,
right on. Yeah.
I can't approach certain authors and be like, or their agents and be like, hey, can you send something to me? I only pay $100. They would laugh. I mean, not that, and it's not always about the money. Definitely there are writers who it's about their time, really. But it's not to say that writers who make money would always say no. But so I always in the reason why all the stories are online as one big long page, and that you can move from one story to another, is to mimic a little bit of that, just like page turning. It's obviously a totally different format. The reason why the CSS is set up so that there are actually paragraphs with indents rather than the very prolific assumed online format of chunk of text and then a space and then chunk of text. Like that's how online works, and it's different from books. So even that like subtlety of doing that and like type-style choice and that kind of thing. And then of course there's different rules when I'm putting the print edition together. But so I definitely want to keep that going, of course, as long as I can, and try to, try to get some more readers and audio readers and just and make the magazine a little bit more frequent than 3 times a year. But I've definitely seen magazines like blow out, get a good year in and like can't, even if they have staff and are making money to keep going, like if you're too frequent, like every month, I can't imagine at this point. Maybe someday, but I also, but it is still a side project for me, and I need time to work on my own writing. So like 3 times a year or 4 times a year is about right, that I can take a few weeks where I don't have to think.
But it seems like your audience might digest better too. Hey, I've got this, and I'm gonna spend the next 2-3 months reading all this and taking it all in and really appreciating it, as opposed to like, oh, I didn't even finish the last one and there's more, and I'm not getting through these. Like that cadence makes some sense, and you can outproduce yourself. Yeah. I mean,
and I subscribe to many other magazines. Used to subscribe to a lot of print magazines, and I could never read everything in every issue, to be honest, of course. Like my to be read list, especially when I go to a conference or I go to somebody's book release, like I'm always coming home with more books, and I've got 5 to be read piles, and some books that I intended a year ago to read in a week or in a month, I haven't gotten to yet. And I'm just like, wow, I feel really guilty about that. But everyone I know who loves to read and reads often is totally in the same boat.
And you post like once a week or a couple times a month a list of books I want to read on Facebook.
Oh yeah,
it's like it's a list. Like it's not like 1 or 2. It's like 10, and then you keep updating that. So yeah.
Well, and I said, oh yeah, and one of my friends asked me a month ago, like, what's going on? You're not reading all these? And I was like, well, I am eventually, but I mean, I'm not that fast of a reader, but doing that is I do that partially to keep my TBR pile updated, so I know what's coming out and when, because I see cover reveals and pre-orders from a lot of colleagues and people and writers I'm fans of, and I can't remember when things are coming out, so I will look a little bit on social, but I have to like write them down somewhere so that I know when to get it, or when they're coming on book tour, if they can do that, or whatever's happening. But so I'm keeping an ongoing list, but I also really love celebrating. Half of those are usually small presses and or from lists of indigenous or Black authors that you don't usually see. And I also, I'll look at Publishers Weekly of all the ISBNs that books come out traditionally on Tuesdays. Movies come out on Fridays. Wasn't it albums used to come out on Wednesdays, I think? I don't remember what the day was for albums.
But yeah.
It might have been Friday. It might have been Fridays too. And of course, like that's still traditional in the big publishing world. Like small presses will release a book whenever they want, but you there is a way in which if you get on the formal list, right, that you'll have more of a chance. If you're on Tuesday release schedule, that like libraries and book buyers and stuff will see that. So I'll look at Publishers Weekly, and sometimes it's 300. It averages about 200 to 300 titles per week, and out of that, there's usually 5 that I've been looking for, or like I'll see it but haven't seen it on social lately, and I'm like, wow, I'm really glad I looked here. But also I have to keep up with a lot of small presses that I really like Word Horde and Clash Books and Tenebris Press and Dim Shores does a lot of novellas. Doug Moreno does Bad Hand Books, which also does like limited editions. Has only been around a short time, but a lot of weird fiction authors are starting to do some titles over there just because, and with a lot of these small presses, because they just really like everything about the approach. Working with that editor, they're to just like getting what it is about their work, that when they go out to look to get cover art for the book, like they know what they're talking about. They know who's going to like that kind of book, and I see a lot of great marketing going on with the smaller press. But so I might eventually, as a side note, I've had Legion Press just kind of as a placeholder for a while, and it is like,
yeah, I was wondering. I saw that
it is the
were all out of
publishing
print,
for Three Low Burning Eye, and I used to have a couple titles in the 90s where I did a comic book and 2 poetry books, and I took submissions for a while for longer works, and was going to do some other titles so that it wasn't just a vanity press, but honestly, like it just took a lot of time to do all that. We never did any other titles, and I hope to. I've seen a couple of magazines do novellas on the side. I might try to take that as a step. We'll see how it goes, because that would be cool. I'd love to do some weird little. I've also worked on some done some scripts and done some short films with some people, some of which have been at some festivals. I really enjoy making short films, but like it's possible that like something that is related to Three Lobe just as like a distribution thing, that I might eventually do some little film projects that would just be little 3-minute movies or whatever, like some other kind of thing. But the main thing is always just going to be like storytelling in that prose form, and just reading it and letting the words create the images in the world in your head.
Can you give us a quick overview of your Kickstarter and let us know how much time is left?
Sure.
So today is the 9th, right? Is that right? Yes, today's the 9th.
Yeah.
So how long
It's
does
the 10th for me, but it's the 9th for you guys.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
sorry. Dean's in another dimension.
I'm in another day.
So how much longer does the Kickstarter go, and what's a quick overview of some pledge levels and what have you?
Okay, so Three Low Burning Eye literary journal that publishes fiction of horror, wonder, and weird has been around for 25 years online, has published a lot of great authors. We are running a crowdfunding on Kickstarter right now. That is, in fact, only 4 days remaining. We are at 95% of our goal. And if we don't reach our goal, Kickstarter's rule is all or nothing. So if we don't reach our goal, we don't get any of it. So we are offering rewards, which are anything from like subscriptions to autographed books to story critiques. There's some original artwork. There are book bundles, all sorts of extra things that you can get something fun or interesting to go along with a pledge that you might make, which could be anything from $1 to any higher amount. And then we also have some
don't put a cap on it, right?
Yeah, as a lot of places do, we also have some stretch goals that if we get more than our funding goal, we will put that money toward doing more next year. So this Kickstarter is actually for 2025, doing 3 issues of the magazine and paying the contributing authors at pro rates and updating our submission system. And I feel like there's something else that's part of it. A bunch of back end things that all take place before the editor ever gets paid, which is last on the payment schedule. But if we make one of our stretch goals, for instance, we'll do another issue next year. We'll have more stories and more. I actually have like a second dozen authors who have never been in the magazine before who agreed to write a story. So we're hoping to get more fiction in there that people can read next year. And then we'll see what happens at the end of 2025. We may have, if we have some left over, we'll carry that over into the next year. But chances are, unless like subscriptions go up significantly, like we'll probably do some crowdfunding every year, which seems to be the model. And I'm not going to feel guilty about it anymore because that's the way things work.
Right on. All right. Well, Dean, you got any follow-ups, any final comments, questions, anything?
No, this has been awesome. And I'm like, and hopefully we can spit this out quickly so that 4 days isn't actually just 1 day. But it's cool to hear that you're that close to the goal, though, too. Like,
yeah, because you made some real progress over the weekend.
We have 4 days left, and we're at 5% or something. That would be.
Yeah,
I've been very surprised at how amazing the weekends have been. Like, it's been the complete opposite of what I see in social media behavior. Which I'm assuming it's just because it may be because people can kind of just take a break from the busy work life during the week and like have a chance to sit down and think about doing something. Yeah, right. They're on their second beer and they're like, "Who am I going to give money
Hey, I got
to?"
an extra $25.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get some candles. Yeah.
Right.
This has been a really, really like enlightening and insightful conversation, and I'm glad like I had the notion like, hey, let's try to get in there with something that we can, if we can, get it out and support this thing. But also, it's been like a long time coming to sort of have a little reunion here of the three of us. Yeah, I would like to urge everybody to check out Three Low Burning Eye online, Legion Press, and the Kickstarter. Look for art by Ruex because it's kind of all you have multiple URLs and domain names that all kind of feed in together. So Dean, we're doing it different now, and we got some stuff coming up, and weirdly we now have 3 recorded episodes that we have yet to release. So we're gonna have to decide what order we're gonna do.
Yeah.
But But
Well, I think this is going to be first. It would.
this is going to be
make
first.
a whole lot of
Absolutely.
sense to.
No. This is first, but then there's the and by the way, we're changing our format, and our topic a little bit will be like the next one probably, and then there's the one we did like 2.5 months ago. So we've got some stuff for people to look forward to, some things to take a look at in our own like hobby sort of nerd approaches, our own little passion projects on the side that aren't this podcast. So Andrew, thank you so much for coming on and putting up with the weekly or monthly task that is eventually getting able to record.
That wasn't too bad. I think that went a lot.
No,
faster
actually,
than
that was
other
pretty
things.
good for us. Like that was like, let's just restart it and try again. Hey, it worked.
Which is pretty quick.
Yeah, well, for us it was like lightning because dude, it could be an hour and a half sometimes.
Oh, we've had ones that it was over an hour.
It was like, like we're exhausted
Dang.
by the time we start talking because we couldn't get the damn OBS to
Now
work.
we'll just record us taking a nap before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Set an alarm.
Well, and you can sometimes tell, like, we get halfway through an episode and we're like, yeah, oh yes, like the speed just goes away. But okay, at any rate, so this has been the first of our third wave of episodes of Exit 181 podcast. I'm Matt Duncan.
I'm Dean Biaggi. I don't know why I said it that way.
I do.
I'm guest Andrew Fuller. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so glad.
And
to
Andrew
Feel
will be back
free.
for a Charlotte's Web.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I'll have to
we'll
do a
get
photo.
we'll get there definitely. I was afraid we'll be done with this thing in 40 minutes, and no, but that's cool.
And
That's
then
great.
and then Andrew started talking. Feel free to cut a lot out, especially when I'm rambling and pausing and
know,
just
it's-
like
And
whatever.
Pretty much all of our episodes are like 2 hours long. We're always like,
Yeah.
we're gonna knock this out in 20 minutes.
Andrew,
Yeah,
I'm gonna copy it all and like duplicate it so that you say everything twice. We're gonna make
Oh,
this a
great.
5-hour
Oh,
episode.
great. I'll just
right.
call it a deep fake.
Yes, right. That's not him. All right.
Where's
Thanks
that third
everybody
name?
for watching.
No, okay.
Go check out the Kickstarter for Three Little Burning Eye, and we'll see you hopefully within the next week or two with more content.
Cool.
Sayonara.
Bye. Thanks.
Aw.